Thank you, Sahil. And just to say that Sahil and I are very glad to host this seminar on such a topical theme, platform capitalism during COVID-19. We are both lecturers in the department, and the seminar is part of the research activities at PERC. And just to briefly introduce Sandro Mezzadra, for those who don't know him yet, Professor Sandro Mezzadra he works at the University of Bologna as an associate professor and is a world-leading scholar, well known for his work on migration, borders, logistics, and his publications on Marx. And among his publication in English, I remember Border as Method, a co-author with Brett Nielsen, The Politics of Operation, co-author with Brett Nielsen, and In the Marxian Workshop that came out with Roman and Littlefield. So Professor Will Davies is professor in political economy at Goldsmiths and is co-director of PERC. So Will Davies will provide a comment to Sandro's talk, and then Sahil and I will coordinate the Q&A after Will's comment. So Sandro, thanks a lot. We are very honored to have you here, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with you today and to have the opportunity to share with you some outcomes of my work on platforms. Let me begin by saying that my work on platforms is part of a more general work on logistics. And this work on logistics is not an individual work. It is rather part of a dense fabric of research, collaborations, and political complicity.
Please mute your microphone. All the others should mute their microphone.
Το δικό, νομίζω το δικό μου είναι πιο καλό. Είναι με μπαλκόν. Λίγο πιο καλό φαίνεται.
Sorry, you should, all the others should mute their microphone.
Okay. So I was just saying that my work on logistics is not an individual work. It's part of a dense fabric of research collaborations and political complicities in different parts of the world. Of course, I should mention here my friend and co-author, Brett Nielsen, but I would like also to mention a collective of younger scholars and activists. The name of the collective is Into the Black Box. If you are interested in logistics, you should really check their websites. Over the last years, logistics has emerged the kind of lens for the critical analysis of contemporary capitalism writ large. And this is the perspective that also shapes my work on platforms. Also, my work on platforms is not an individual work. Over the last 2 years, I have been coordinating an ambitious Horizon 2020 research project. The acronym is PLUS, Platform Labor in Urban Spaces. And in the project, we have 3 thematic focuses: labor, urban spaces, and welfare. We analyze 4 platforms, Airbnb, Deliveroo, Uber, and Helpling, in 7 cities: Barcelona, Berlin, Bologna, Lisbon, London, Paris, and Tallinn. Over the last couple of months, we also did a bit of research on the COVID-19 impact on platforms, which is, of course, a differentiated impact. If you take Deliveroo, for instance, the activities of the platforms have been booming during the crisis. If you take Airbnb, it was a really difficult moment for them. During the crisis, we discovered that riders, particularly riders employed in food delivery, are essential workers. And in the COVID-19 crisis, the precarious condition of workers in the gig economy has emerged in full light. No access to statutory sick pay and parental leaves, for instance. In general, governments facilitated easier access to other social benefits, including, for instance, employment and support allowance, ESA, in the UK. But the problem was made even tougher by the general lack of protection devices provided by platforms. And it is around this general condition of precarity and around the lack of protection devices provided by platforms that struggles have developed in many European cities, including Bologna, the city where I am based. More generally, one can say that if the financial crisis of 2007-2008 provided the ideal conditions for the emergence of platform capitalism, the COVID-19 crisis will be remembered as a crucial moment for its consolidation. Platforms have further entrenched their grip on social relations and will definitely emerge as winners from the current deep economic crisis. Take, for instance, Zoom, the platform that we are using today for this webinar. The market capitalization of Zoom has skyrocketed to $8.8 billion, despite posting revenues of only $623 million over the past year. I think we can take this boom of the market capitalization of Zoom as symptomatic of a more general trend. I repeat that the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on platforms is highly differentiated. So some platforms will definitely emerge as winners from the current economic crisis, while for other platforms, the COVID-19 crisis will be a kind of existential test. I was mentioning before Airbnb. So before opening the floor to a general discussion, I would like to make two more general points regarding platforms and platform capitalism. I think it is worth asking once again kind of vexed question: what is a platform? And a basic definition of platforms may be particularly helpful. Platforms are devices of social intermediation. And social intermediation refers to a whole spectrum of social relations. I think we have all experienced during the lockdown that platforms have gained a kind of monopoly on social relations. This happened, of course, in exceptional times, but once again, as I was saying before, for the market capitalization of Zoom, I think we have to take this experience as symptomatic of a more general trend, of a trend that was, of course, underway long before the COVID-19 crisis. So platforms are devices of social intermediation, and social intermediation refers to a wide spectrum of social relations which platforms govern through data. This is for me a very important point. We can speak of a politics of platforms. Platforms are governmental devices. Platforms govern social relations through data. And data refer both to the most intimate sphere of the individual and to the totality of his or her social relation. So the singular dimension and the common dimension of our life and experience are both exposed to the grip, to the governmental grip of platforms. And this means that even from a conceptual point of view, there is a strict relationship between the operations of platforms on the one hand and the domain of politics on the other hand. Platforms encroach, therefore, on the political field as they are, I want to repeat it, governmental devices. They perform, in Foucauldian terms, a conduct of conduct. So if we look at platforms, at the operations of platforms, from the angle of government or governmentality or governance, it is quite clear that data appropriation and private property emerge as crucial fields of struggle and negotiation. There is a moment of private appropriation of data that enables the governmental operations of platforms. And we have to look at platforms also from this important political angle. A second and last point that I would like to discuss with you. Platforms are governmental devices, as I explained. However, platforms are first and foremost capitalist devices. So we have to look at platforms from the angle of government But we also have to look at platforms from the angle of capitalist valorization. Maybe better. The real interesting point for me is that in order to prompt the processes of capitalist valorization, platforms are in a way compelled to encroach on the political field. There is a kind of blurring between, let's say, the economic and the political that emerges in a particularly clear way when we look at the operations of platforms. So platforms are capitalist devices. We have to ask another vexed question, which is the source of value in the operations of platforms, which is the source of the processes of capitalist valorization that operations of platforms prompt and facilitate. I think it makes sense to speak of a double source of value in the case of platforms. On the one hand, labor continues to be a crucially important source of value in platform capitalism. I have mentioned before the riders, but we could mention other figures of labor that play crucial role in the valorization of capital invested in platform and are therefore exploited in a very specific way. So first of all, if we ask what is the source of value in the operations of platform, we are confronted with labor, we are confronted with the labor exploitation. But this is not enough in order to understand the dynamics of capitalist valorization in the operations of platform. A second quote and unquote source of value has to be considered. And this second source of value is, of course, data, the new raw material upon which processes of valorization are predicated in platform capitalism. So if we look at data, what immediately strikes us is the fact that we are the producers of data. That data emerge out of our interactions. This means that through extraction and manipulation of data, platforms perform a kind of dispossession. So on the one hand, exploitation, on the other hand, dispossession. Of course, I didn't choose these terms by accident. I'm thinking, for instance, of the influential distinction proposed by David Harvey between accumulation by exploitation and accumulation by dispossession. And my point is that the opposition between exploitation and dispossession does not really work in the case of platforms. Exploitation and dispossession are rather intermingled in the operation of platforms. And this is both a theoretical and a political challenge. Moreover, to conclude, the operations of platforms with respect to data point to the strategic relevance of an extractive moment in the operations of platforms. And this extractive moment does not pertain only to platforms, but is rather characteristic of contemporary capitalism writ large, as Brett Nielsen and myself try to demonstrate in the politics of operations. So on the one hand, what is needed is a careful and detailed analysis of platforms, but on the other hand, platforms can also be used as a lens, as I was saying before, with respect to logistics, to investigate contemporary capitalism writ large. So I would conclude, and I'm happy to reply to questions and comments. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Sandro. I think it was super interesting, and I think we can start with Will's response, Will's comment to Sandro's talk.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Sandro, for joining us today. It was really terrific to be able to host you virtually at the Political Economy Research Centre at Goldsmiths. There's obviously lots of things that we can pick up in the discussion here. I think what I thought I might just add to some of this, there are lots of conceptual distinctions here which I think are worth teasing apart, and it's obviously that you've got a absolutely superbly timed project. Rather unfortunate that it's quite so well timed, but obviously it's going to reveal some very important features of the contemporary crisis. I just wanted to kind of supplement it really, and maybe add some things. I'll just take sort of 5 minutes or so, which maybe might contribute to some further discussion as well. Which is about some of the economic side of this, and also to maybe open up some questions for you and maybe for others as well about where this might lead in the future. Just a couple of things I think that are worth reflecting on as well. I mean, you mentioned a few specific platforms, and obviously Zoom has attracted a huge amount of investment over the course of this crisis, and it's become the way we all interact. The number that people keep throwing around is that Zoom is now, or at one point was worth more than the entire US airline industry, which is something which I think tells us so much about the state that we're in at the moment. The other, I've been working on a piece about apps recently, and the app which has experienced the greatest rise in usage over the course of the lockdown was WhatsApp. And I think that, I mean, I'm not quite sure exactly, I mean, that is, I guess, technically a platform. And I think that is also potentially quite sociologically interesting. In Spain, where the lockdown was, I think, stricter than and longer than anywhere else in Europe, or at least the strictest phase was stronger than it was certainly in the UK. Use of WhatsApp went up by 76% over that time, and it's much more than any of the other social media platforms. And I think this raises interesting questions about the types of sociality and community and social networks that are going to be left at the end of or the aftermath of this crisis. In the sense that there are, some of this is about neighborhood support groups and mutual aid groups and that sort of thing. Some of it's about kind of family bubbles and groups of people who are communicating constantly. But that, I think, this sort of potential turn to the private space, the platform as a mediator of private communication, is one thing that maybe we should consider as well. More broadly, economically, of course, Amazon is the platform that I don't think you mentioned, but I mean, it goes without saying that Amazon is the platform that is benefiting hugely from this crisis. And the other widely reported statistic was that Jeff Bezos's personal worth had risen by 24 billion by the end of March from before the crisis began at the end of January. So this is an astonishing expansion of an existing oligarchical reach. And where you were talking about the ways in which these platforms blur the distinction between the economic and the political, that reminded me of a term that I read in the work of Frank Pasquale, but I'm not quite sure if it's his, but that these platforms are developing what he calls effective sovereignty, where they are something closer to a market regulator than to a regular market actor. And of course, Airbnb would have been something like that, but as you say, it has now a rather kind of precarious position in the present crisis. I just wanted to kind of flag some questions about where some of these trends might be leading in the future. They are, of course, these companies, as you note, are incredibly making huge, or some of them are making huge profits at the moment, and they are incredibly highly capitalized. The dominance of the top 5 companies in the US stock market at the moment is greater than it's been for decades. Those companies being Facebook, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, and what would the other one be? Amazon. And this obviously offers huge possibilities for new types of investment strategies, new areas for growth that they might be looking at. One thing which I think is worth just thinking a bit about, without wanting to increase the pessimism further, is the extent to which there are going to be, what is going to be the aftermath of this particular crisis? What are going to be the possibilities for some of these companies moving into new areas of what might almost be considered to be forms of economic development, in a sense. And there is actually a precedent for this, because if you look at the way in which certainly in the United Kingdom, when you get these new mixed-use, mixed-tenure developments that spring up, these kind of condo developments around, which are a mixture of kind of inner-city regeneration mixed with new forms of, speculation on real estate investment. Many of these operate with a type of platform logic to them, even if they're not actually platforms as we understand it, in as much as what they're often doing is bringing lots of different small businesses together, offering them sorts of types of rent breaks and this sort of thing, in order to try and attract them to particular areas, so as to try and build up, in economic terms, the kind of positive externalities or the kind of spillover benefits for that local area, so as to appreciate the value of that real estate. This is a sort of model for how, in a sense, investment is used not to as a way of trying to underpin the development of a market, to act as a mediator between local businesses, residents, and a mixture to try and develop a kind of ecology of local economic development. The other kind of example of that, which I sometimes think about in a sort of, this is kind of the status of science fiction at the moment, is when you look at the growth of new music festivals or other kinds of festivals over recent years, which often operate on a single platform for the operating of the payment systems, for the marketing, and for the data collection across a whole range of different, might be sort of small kind of pizza businesses, small textile designers, or whatever it might be. But what digital platforms have enabled is, at the same time as obviously the great monopoly of the giant platforms of the sort that you're talking about, is also the ability to nurture and mediate these kind of markets of a kind of new type of petty bourgeoisie, but which, rather than just being premised upon some vision of a liberal market, are actually also premised on a vision of a market that is actually owned and operated and constantly scraped by types of platform logic. Now, if you add to that the fact that Facebook, of course, only a couple of years ago had its failed attempt to introduce its own currency, what you begin to see is the possibility of a new type of liberal market construct that is not just the object of a kind of regulation of the sort that we might see Amazon as being a type of this sort of effective sovereign or sort of privatized market regulator, but a whole new range of new tools for which could be put to use as a type of economic development, or a type of urban regeneration, the like of which I think it's clear there is going to be the need for, and possibly the political support for. I think this is the big question: is the extent to which this becomes a new type of privatized Keynesianism. Privatized Keynesianism being the term that was originally used to describe the use of consumer credit in order to drive economic growth. But you could imagine the role of these sorts of platform operators actually intervening in local economies in different ways. Now, obviously, Deliveroo, Uber Eats, and these sorts of companies are already operating in that fashion for connecting up local businesses. I think the question of how much further that could go at a time when there is going to be whether you want to see it as a fiscal crisis, but certainly there is going to be certain demands for austerity in certain areas. There is also going to be this huge recession in areas such as hospitality, entertainment, and many local small businesses. The question of what platforms do in that situation, where there is going to be at least the opportunity of a smaller state in many respects, in a fiscal sense, huge capitalization of some of these companies, and many of them are very cash rich as well. The question of how the logic of the platform starts to encroach further into our offline lives, our urban lives, and into the space of this kind of new urban petty bourgeoisie or suburban petty bourgeoisie, I think is something that we should at least look out for as a new capacity of these tools to extend their monopolistic, and not really just monopolistic, but also regulatory reach into areas that are still at the front end appear to be something that resembles the liberal market, but at the back end are something which are much closer to the sorts of data analytics tools that we're already familiar with when we talk about Amazon, Facebook, and so on. So I'm going to stop there, but I wanted to kind of throw out those sort of additional questions, really, because of course we've already seen. I mean, Airbnb, as you say, it's an interesting question of what happens to Airbnb once physical proximity becomes a matter of risk. But there are these other areas that I think that as we move out of this current crisis, whether the Airbnb model could also move into some other areas of retail, entertainment, hospitality, and so on, which are of course the ones which are currently most devastated by the crisis.